Coming to you live from the city of Port Phillip. Well, you've been sending us emails, you've been asking us in person. Here is the episode that talks all about what happened last week at Wednesday's rather complex and confusing council meeting where the Grey Community Safety Report was tabled at the city of Port Phillip. Last Wednesday night saw 47 speakers in a very late night vote on the major safety and homelessness issues in the city of Port Phillip. The long-awaited Grey Report, which was requested by Council 160 days earlier or thereabouts, was finally provided to the public and to councillors, and it was their turn to have an overview of what was in the report and what the recommendations were. Greg Day, Andrew Bond, welcome to us. Let's have a quick conversation about what was in the report to start with and where we're at. So the council meeting last Wednesday was well attended. Greg Day, you were there. Tell us briefly what occurred and where we actually are in the process.
Yes, well, there's a lot of people there. 47 people, as you said, spoke from the public. They made their submissions and they're very heartfelt. It was very civil. So it was a very civil session. And, I guess the short answer is that the Grey Report was well received by councillors and there was a lot of interesting detail in that. I urge everyone to have a read of that. I put a summary up on Twisk, but the key part of the report is only 37 pages long, so it's not a really heavy read, but it's very considered. It's forensic.
So it's made lots of recommendations, but there's one missing, which was a recommendation to change the local law. Give us some insight to that, Greg.
Well, he bypassed that, said that was going to be dealt with in another report, which it was. But his main thing was that he wanted to deal with a protocol, so there was a more comprehensive way that the council, local laws, people, that welfare agencies and the police work together, and they shared the same three-tiered approach, which was to, inform, insist, and then enforce. So it was pretty clear on that. And once you understand that, you can see what happened at the council.
So the Grey Report's been tabled. The recommendations have been tabled. There was some interesting wording in the motion around this in terms of council indicating they're going to continue to implement a certain number of recommendations to report, indicating that they're already doing them. What happens next?
Well, the officers put up a whole lot of recommendations and the councillors put up alternates and ran through, and there were three alternates. One said there's at least 10 recommendations that we can do immediately that don't require more money, that don't require a change of policy. So let's endorse those. And that was unanimous. And then they had put two motions up about the changes to the local laws. And in that, they said, well, look, we'll put up a motion supporting working with the police to implement the protocol that Grey was advocating. So that requires action by the police and the welfare agencies. So that was supported unanimously. And then there was a separate motion to go out to community consultation about a change to the local law that enabled the CEO to designate problem areas as no camping zones that would have a more, like a firmer, compassionate response. So where people would be informed that they couldn't, offered welfare assistance, and if they didn't move, then the area would be declared a no camping area and all the camping paraphernalia would be taken away.
Now, this is where things got confusing in the meeting. It was very difficult, even for a seasoned professional like Andrew Bond, to follow what was actually going on at this point. So there's a bit of a loophole in the meeting procedures that was, well, I wouldn't say it was used, but alt motions were put up which don't require to be read out at meetings, and in fact it was quite confusing for people in the audience to follow what was going on. And if you look at it, it seemed to be confusing for councillors as well. In fact, they were still editing the motion after it had been moved and seconded, which is fairly unusual practice. So an alt motion was put up for the local law which contradicted what officers had recommended by Macon and Mayers. That's the one you're referring to there, Greg.
Well, there are three alternate motions put up.
Well, the first one that passed, the final one that passed, well, on the local law we're talking about,
all right,
is it's on the screen. So now this is the bit where it went, I wouldn't say off script, but it deviated substantially from what the officers had recommended in terms of a change to the local law. That motion went up and was passed, what was it, 6 votes to 3, right? So take us through what happened with the local law vote.
Okay, so it was a very divided debate. And basically the three people who opposed it said that it was unnecessary. And what they wanted to do was implement the protocol. And they said, if you implement the protocol, you won't need this change to this local law. And they thought it was punitive and harsh. Now, the other side said, well, we told people we were going to consult about community safety. We've got the report. The public haven't seen the report. Let's read the report, let people feedback about it, and we will include this idea of the designated no camping zones in the consultation. So they haven't approved it, they haven't decided to do it. And in fact, at least 2 councillors said they only put it out there to see what people thought, and they felt an obligation to do that rather than support the idea.
Well, and I think those 2 councillors have been copying a bit of heat into the meeting in terms of actually supporting to put it out, which is interesting. But nonetheless, it's passed. It's passed 6 votes to 3. It was a late night. It's their first late council meeting, I would say. What time did it finish?
Oh, the council
left the meeting at about. I left the meeting about 10:30 after the community safety items, and they were still getting on with the rest of the meeting at that time. So I think it was at least a midnight meeting.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, they deferred a lot of items to shut down. So, but look, you're not alone. This is a blow your trumpet opportunity. Got an email from Ian Ray saying, "Thanks for the article. Now I understood what happened." So there you go. Read Twisk and you will understand.
Yeah, there's a good view on Twisk. So just Google I'll put the website up so you can see it. Well, that TWISK St Kilda. Just Google that and it'll take you to the subtract line that you've got there, which has got a very good 1,000-page summary, 1,000-word summary of what happened on Wednesday night. So the meeting itself, in recording wise, it was very confusing. I found it. Andrew, take us through your thoughts on how the meeting was conducted and what you got out of it, and then let's the 3 of us have a chat about where we go from here.
I went to bed at 10:30 last Wednesday night, not knowing what they had voted on and what changes had been made, if any, to the officers' recommendations. Was one, because you couldn't read them on the little screen I was watching the council meeting on. And 2, they didn't read out the motions, which is rather unusual. And maybe that would have provided some clarity to anyone sitting there listening at home or even in the room trying to work out what it is the changes were to the councillors or the council officers' recommendations. So I sort of had to wait for Greg's summary and the council minutes to work out what the changes were and what it was they actually voted on. So I was none the wiser on the night as to what it was. It was interesting that the three councillors who earlier on in the year or late last year said they wouldn't support this but voted in favour of it anyway earlier in the year, this time around voted against. So they didn't have that unanimous vote that they were hoping to get or maybe had achieved on earlier votes. But there were also a number of councillors who said, I'm only supporting this for the consultation, but I'm unsure as to whether I would support the implementation should it come back to us down the track. So there's going to be some more intrigue there. Maybe there's just people sitting on the fence not wanting to have an opinion for fear of upsetting one side or the other, as Marcus alluded to earlier.
Well, I think there's another thing too, is that all this was very dynamic. It happened in the meeting, that people were moving around, negotiating these things and getting the numbers while the meeting was going on. So, I've got it on from a couple of sources that the councillor only time about this had got quite heated, and it was an emotional issue. So in reality, they did quite well to keep a lid on it.
Councillor only time never got heated when we were there, Marcus.
Oh, tell me another fib. Yes.
Well, it'd be surprised. It's a controversial issue, but what's unusual is you don't usually see people negotiating on the floor over something this big. They've had 160 days to get this in order. They've had the report for a couple of weeks. It just seems very unusual that you'd be negotiating votes for a motion to change the gospel of the city in terms of the local law on the floor of a meeting. That's quite unusual. And the way it was actually done in the meeting was, I've actually never seen it done like that before. In terms of if you're doing something structurally so significant, you got to be very transparent with the community about it. But look, it's all in the minutes now, so it's fairly clear. But at the time, I didn't. Watching it again, I didn't watch the whole meeting. I just watched those components to it, but it was very confusing and not very transparent.
Well, but I don't think it's that dramatic. What they did was they approved the bits that they could.
Yes.
Then they divided up quite a detailed response to the local laws into two, which is the bit that they all agreed on, and the bit that was controversial. So it was a classic manoeuvre.
Well, yeah, sure, but it's a fairly big deviation from the officer's recommendation that had been put out in the public domain. So the public hadn't seen any of those manoeuvres. And if you're doing something like that, you need to explain it fairly explicitly. Andrew?
I was going to pretty much agree with you because I watched it and I had no idea what it was they were voting on. So anyone else like me, I'm not sure if it was obvious to those in the room, but anyone like me watching at home would have had no idea what it was they were voting on, what changes were made, and why people were voting the way they voted. That wasn't a very transparent moment for the community, and most of us had to wait for the minutes to come out to look up and see exactly what it was. And that's probably not good decision making, especially at 10 or 10:30 at night after you've been sitting there listening to people and talking to each other for 4 hours. It's probably not a great way to be making changes to your local law.
So what's the reception been on the street with stakeholders, etc.? Well, Greg, you go first, but what's the reception been of the report, of the meeting? What's happening now? Because the council's been dealing with this for a long time. Where's it heading now?
Well, I'm not sure about this most recent decision, but my feeling is that the Gray report was well received, that it was, considered, and people liked the way it was considered, and they liked the way he went about it. So, I think that's dropped in and been quite effective, especially considering he did it for free. So he did it as a pro bono job. So they really got much more than their money's worth. So I think they're pleased with that. Now, the question... Well, go on, Andrew.
No, you finish.
Well, I think the question, they've always given themselves, look, this council likes to have the back door of their engagement. They'll say, we're going to have this thorough community engagement. They'll do it for 5 weeks, and then they'll make up their own mind. Now, I'm not sure that that's thorough, and I'm not sure that it's not just a rubber stamp, but nevertheless, this process has, it's really trying to weave a dance on this minefield between two quite extreme opinions. One that, it's going to hell in a handbasket, and the other is that we need to be more compassionate. And, I think it's a very good start for weaving your way through that.
Andrew, go ahead.
I'd say, Marcus, I think the Gray report, just to speak to that quickly, was a very well received and thorough report. It went very hard on the state government, probably harder than many people would have been expecting, by spelling out that the state government needs to step up in terms of police resources and police responses, that the state government needs to step up and do more for homeless people and Indigenous communities in our area. And it made it very clear that these areas are not the remit of council, but the remit of the state government, and the state government needs to do more in those areas. And that, I think, was a surprise how hard Ian Gray went against the state government, but hopefully the state government listens and the state government takes some of that on board, and we see a response from them, not just from council, with a minor adjustment to the local laws, which most people I've spoken to, including some current councillors, said it's not going to make any difference whatsoever to anything we'll see on the streets, even if they were to go through with these changes to the law. The one intervention that everyone is looking for is a greater police presence and a greater police response. And it's fine for the police to say we want the local law changed, but if the police are not going to get out there and do their jobs and enforce all of the existing laws, we are not going to see any change to anything happening on the streets of St Kilda. Even if we do have designated special no camping zones in certain areas declared by the CEO, if there's 3 or more people and a protocol and all that sort of stuff that they seem to be wanting to bring in, it's not going to matter and not going to make any changes unless the police step up and do their bit, and the courts step up and do their bit, and some of the state services step up and do their bit for the homeless and for the Indigenous populations in our area.
On the local law, what do we think the votes are? So at the next, it goes out to consultation. As Greg said, it's fairly divided. Let's assume the sort of similar ratio that you got from the 47 people turning up. If it's not changed based on consultation and what we saw the other night, what do we think the votes are on the change of the local law at the next meeting? Well, not the next meeting, but when it comes back.
The simple answer to that, Marcus, is it's 3, 3 and 3. 3 right in favour, 3 against, and 3 sitting on the fence.
What are you hearing, Greg?
And the 3 that's sitting on the fence all said that in their statements. They're not sure they would support it when it comes back, but they want to be seen to be consulting with the community, and that's important to those 3.
And they put out an out clause. They said, we're not from St Kilda. We don't have the same problem. So the 3 are Consolo, Macon, and Thomone. So, the 2 of them have quite different interests. So, but look, the thing is what was good about the Gray report, what was insightful is he's separated off the Indigenous issues and said, look, that needs special report. Now, that'll have sympathy within the state. Then he's saying, okay, what we need to do is we've got this situation where the police are prepared to step up and do certain welfare-ish things, but if it happens in the middle of the night, there's no backup for them. That all these agencies, there's this whole plethora of agencies, but none of them work 24/7. And then the third thing is there's actually nowhere for street people to go. Now, in my ignorance, I thought, well, that's the role that, Sacred Heart was playing with their meals and breakfasts and stuff like that, but they're not.
Just to interrupt there, Greg, it used to be the role that Sacred Heart played until they put up the big fence and the big gate across the front of their building, whereby they would feed people. When then, once the meals were over, they would move everyone on off their front porch and onto the street, and that's probably contributed to a lot of what we're seeing down on Fitzroy Street and in Acland Street, is that people can't gather on the steps of Sacred Heart anymore the way they could have 5 or 10 years ago, because Sacred Heart deemed it not safe to have them around there, even though their staff were trained. They had the social workers, they had security, they had all the services there and access to the services, but they deemed it not safe for them. So they put the fence up and shut the gate. And that's, I know it's probably sounds a little bit cruel to say this, but Sacred Heart have moved their problem onto the streets of St Kilda, and that's what we're witnessing now on Fitzroy Street.
Well, Sacred Heart are not fools, and they've run their meals like it's a military operation, and it's very closely controlled, and there's lots of protocols that they have. So this idea of a drop-in hub would be a challenge to run, and I think it's a good idea, but our history of deciding where to put these things is a real challenge.
One of the other things I'm hearing also, so the Grey report was produced by, I think, 20 service providers in total. They're from housing providers, but they were predominantly housing providers, community service providers, frontline providers, and experts. One thing I'm hearing is just how, when we were on council, we were constantly told how well coordinated we are and how we're coordinating interest groups really well and service providers together. And the feedback on the sidelines seems to be that isn't necessarily the case. And one of the refreshing things about getting 20 people and the police in the same room was they were actually connecting and coming out with some ideas for synergies and how to work better together, which surprised me a little.
Well, and also you've, I previously did an interview with the local inspector, which is also in Twisk. And, he works with these groups, but he'd never been in the room with them all together before. So there's lots of new territory to be done there, and they're interested. But I think that the clever finding in the Grey report is that, you can't do it in office hours. It has to be more than office hours. Now, the Indigenous organisations have got this sorted a bit. They've got a lot of outreach that works 24/7. They've got teams that can take people to the dry out centre and other interventions. And I think there's hope for more state intervention on that. I see in the state budget there was more money for the First Step clinic in the state budget, which I also reported in Twisk. But look, I've had surveys about community safety out with the 4 local MPs. Now, we've heard from David Southwick and Rachel Westaway. Now, I'm sure that James Newbury's been busy being Shadow Treasurer, but I was looking forward to a response from Nina Taylor about what she thinks is going on, because this is very pivotal to this.
Absolutely. We'll see what happens with the state government's response. As we said, a lot of the report was very much focused on a state government response to the problem. How do we think, that aside, we're not really here that, well, we can discuss whatever you like, but how do we think that council's actually handling this issue and how people in the in the community are perceiving their actions?
I'll go first, Marcus. I think this issue has become all-consuming for council. I know that a number of staff at Port Phillip whose job doesn't generally involve community safety are frustrated that they have been tied up, and all they have been doing with their time over the last 6 months is dealing with community safety matters, and it's not something they really want to be doing. They would rather get back to what is their role and responsibility, but the nature of this and the way councillors have kept bringing this back again and again and again and asking for more reports and more information and more consultation has meant that it's pretty much all that council has focused on and dedicated its time to is community safety, and much to the neglect of all the other items they should be getting on with. We're not hearing anything about in any other subjects, and I think it was a little bit disturbing to hear Greg say that they deferred items at the end of the council meeting the other night. I don't think I ever did that once in 12 years when I was on council, that we deferred an item to the next meeting because we'd run out of time. We've seen a couple of meetings cancelled by this council because presumably there was nothing on the agenda, and all the time is being spent on community safety. But I've never seen at Port Phillip in my time items deferred to the next meeting because we ran out of time. That's a first, and it says that
I think we went through the 1:30, which isn't a good precedent. But
no,
if you have a council meeting like this, you start it at 5:30, or you bring it forward an hour. Or you have a separate special meeting for this item.
Correct, but we always went through to 1:32 in the morning sometimes just to finish the agenda, because we didn't believe in kicking things down the road to the next meeting. Whereas if they've deferred items to the next meeting, well, that's the first in about 13 years that has happened at Port Phillip, and it says that they're not doing the job that they're there to do, because this has become all consuming for them. And I think it's wearing thin on, I know it's wearing thin on a number of councillors, but it's also wearing thin on the staff. And we'll start and see the staff suffer that this is all they seem to be doing, and they're not doing their jobs. And it won't be long before we'll see the community get a bit frustrated that, hey, there's things not happening here that should be happening, because this has become all consuming for council and councillors.
Okay, and also the irony being that the next meeting is one of the cancelled ones. So the 4th of June meeting got cancelled.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
They've deferred these items to a cancelled meeting. Yeah, look, it doesn't look great when you're deferring items when you've cancelled 3 meetings. But look,
I'd like to throw another point in here. I think they'd be feeling pretty good about the way their budget went down, because there
hasn't been much talk about that.
Throwing grenades at them about that. So at the budget session, it was, with the exception of a few people, it was almost a love-in. And so I think, they feel pretty happy about that, that eyebrows, only the usual suspects raise their eyebrows about the maximum rate increase and a pretty hefty waste increase. So...
And the parking fees going up.
When the parking fees going up, and I think the political brilliance in it was the cut to the St Kilda Festival, because that's where sort of, look over here. Which, but yeah, of all the rate rise increases in the past few years, this has been the least since probably 2018, I would say, in terms of noise about people being upset about it. It's interesting. I don't hear much reaction either way.
And there's been very little pushback on the extraordinary increase in parking fees in and around St Kilda. Fitzroy Street, 12.5% increase on the hourly rate and an 8% increase on the day rate. Is 50% the fees at South Melbourne Market have gone up, and no one's really said much about that. They seem to have it sort of has gotten through, which is not going to be a good outcome for St Kilda anyway. We've already got some struggling shops and streets which need a bit of revitalisation, and putting the parking fees up by 12.5% is not the way to do it, not the way to revitalise these streets. I know they are hiding a little bit behind the parking congestion levy that the state government has put up, but that doesn't apply to the on-street parking in St Kilda. So that shouldn't be going up 12.5% based on the congestion levy, because there is no congestion levy to the on-street parking in and around St Kilda.
Well, also on Fitzroy Street, apparently this week, the pop-up shops, 5 of the pop-up shops are closing because that development's starting to go to the demolition stage in June.
I think some of them have moved down the other end though, but yeah, that's having an impact.
One has moved down to, I think it's 3 Fitzroy Street or 5 Fitzroy Street. But yes, we're told that the development that was approved a long time ago now, 3 years ago now, is about to go ahead, and they are about to start decommissioning the services on the building. So we should see some movement there.
Let's just finish off on community safety, because we'll keep this tight and short. I haven't given much of a view tonight. I actually think the council, albeit they're pretty, I think they're acting too slowly. I think they could be going substantially quicker. They're very chuffed with themselves over the Gray report, and so they should be. It was a masterstroke by Libby Buckingham. She's done a good community service, and she's done herself. She's done a very good job on it. So I think she's shown leadership in this, and it's produced a useful tool that's increased trust within the community, albeit I don't think it should have taken as long as it has, that's for sure. But it's given them a sound foundation to move forward with. And albeit I don't think the problem's got any better in the last 6 months whilst they've been grappling with this, certainly no one could say that council isn't turning their attention to this key problem. So I think they're actually handling it pretty well. Politically, they've probably made a few missteps, which were fairly obvious in terms of being accused of finding homeless people, those sorts of things, which are eminently predictable, which they didn't look like they got in front of at all. But that was fairly minor, to be frank. But I think the average person that's watching this in the community probably looks at them and says, yeah, they're acting, they're doing a reasonably good job, albeit the results are still yet to be seen on the street, and most of those results are in the hands of the state government.
Well, and also that it is they're playing a long game to get the state government to come to the party. So we'll see. An election coming, another state budget coming. So, but you can follow all this on Twist, because this is the only place to get commentary on it that's written down.
Also, speaking of which, I just love this photograph of this local inspector story. You couldn't have a more quintessential police officer photo than that one.
That's AI generated for sure, Marcus. That's not a real cop.
Did he let you take that photo? Did you actually take that photo?
Look, I asked him for a photo, and this is what came.
He sent you that because you can see the bloke in the mirror here. Took it.
Yeah, it was taken by a colleague.
So he actually sent that. You didn't actually take it; it was supplied.
Brett Collo is an easy to deal with chap. He's pretty straightforward. He's straight up and down.
Policeman up in the dictionary. That's the photo you would see.
Yeah, well, I was pretty pleased when I got the photo, but nevertheless,
so Greg, tell us the future. What happens here? So this goes out for consultation. It comes back when's the Gray report's going to be?
The consultation ends on the 29th of June. So if you want to have a go, you've got to get Snap, Crackle, Pop onto that. And then it goes through quite a process and doesn't end up in a community safety plan until later on in the year, and doesn't get ratified until December. And then it goes for another 5 years. So it's a very big sausage machine, this. But, I think that, they've started off well.
Final thoughts, Andrew Bond?
I suspect there's going to be a few people disappointed with the outcome here. Not even if I don't think it really matters what they do from here on in. They've put it down the road. They've consulted. Yes, they could make a small change to the local law, declare an area a special no camping, homeless free zone, or whatever it is they want to declare it, and have some sort of protocol. But I just don't think it will make any difference whatsoever. So we're going to be 12 months, 2 years, 3 years time. We're still going to be talking about this same issue, even though we've gone through this process of banning drinking on the streets, which was meant to fix everything, and closing the gap, which was meant to fix everything, and all the other things that the council has done, or installed CCTV, that was going to fix everything. I just don't think anything's going to change until we see a very solid law and order, supported by the court's approach to dealing with the issues we're witnessing here. Everything else is just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, so to speak.
Thanks for joining us tonight, class.
they're going for a shared response to a shared problem. That's their spin, and it's probably true.
But unfortunately, they may be the only ones standing there, Greg, wanting to share the response, because there's been no one, not the police, not the local services, not the state government, stand up and say, all right, we'll help you out here. They're all quite happy to sit back and let council take the heat for issues that the state government, through their various agencies and police force, have a role in assisting to solve.
Got to keep in mind also, there's been a significant investment from the federal government in CCTV as well, and community safety, right? That was a very large step up from Josh Byrne, so he obviously gets it.
Do we know what that commitment is yet?
Well, CCTV upgrades is what council
1.5 mil. 1.5 mil.
But it was nondescript being given to council, isn't it?
Is it? Has that been announced?
The press release that council issued, if I read it correctly, was talking about putting that money into the CCTV upgrade and other initiatives, and that's more than enough to do the CCTV upgrade.
Well,
CCTV upgrade.
Did you see the new job that Josh Burns has?
No.
Assistant Minister for the Homeless.
Yes, he's a special envoy to the homeless.
Envoy for the homeless.
So,
really? I didn't see that. Right.
Yeah, so I put in a request to interview him about that. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah. He's very chuffed about it. So
anyway, we need to talk about his election result. It's just I've had other things on my mind recently. But thank you for your emails and coming up to me on the street and saying that you wanted to hear this episode. So we pulled it together rather quickly. But there you go. You've got the overview in terms of what happened last Wednesday night, where we sit, and you've got the expert opinion from the three white middle-aged men, or whatever it may be.
And a very big hello to all those people who are not watching, Marcus. They're definitely not watching.
They're definitely not watching. We get a lot of hate mail from people who refuse to watch that seem to know what goes on. But look, we love hearing your feedback. So if you've got any feedback, hello@marcuspell.com or 0478136762. Have a good evening and thanks.